other than Adam Gase, I think Josh McDaniels is the worst NFL head coach I've ever seen.
J-Mac here with John, 94 WIP. J-Mac being Jody McDonald. We got another J-Mac who's joining us, and one of the things we're going to talk about is another J-Mac's article in the Philadelphia Inquirer over the weekend. I got plenty more to get into it with John McMullen from SI and Philly Voice and his podcast, as good a podcast on the Eagles as you're going to find, Extending the Play. But yes, we'll get Jeff McLean in here too. John McMullen, how are you, buddy?
Doing well, Jody. And we got another J-Mac, Josh McDaniels. Yes. So it's all J-Mac Monday.
Oh, I'm going to get to him, but we'll hold off on him. When you read, and I know that you guys all have one mission covering the team, and you've got to do your own thing, but you have a little bit of a camaraderie there because you're all working in the same place at the same spot and seeing the same things about the same team. What was your first mental response when you read McLean's piece over the weekend?
Well, I know Jeff well. Jeff's a tremendous reporter. I would argue the best, honestly, that covers the Eagles. But a lot of that, honestly, was already reported by Carson Wentz as far as being headstrong, as far as being difficult to coach, dating really back to John DeFilippo and Frank Reich, who, and I always said, and I've said it on the show, the one thing everyone agrees on with Carson, people that like him, people that dislike him, is, he's very stubborn. And that part is completely true, 100%. Everybody knows it. Everybody understands it. But I always say, guess who else is stubborn? Tom Brady's stubborn. Aaron Rodgers is really, really stubborn. Talk to Greg Jennings about Aaron Rodgers sometime. If you're successful, nobody cares.
Right.
And they expect it a lot of times out of that particular position. Go back in the day, Dan Marino was like that as well. So the fact that Carson played so poorly really kind of manifests things and highlights things and puts more emphasis on the fact that he can be a type A personality, however you want to describe it. He can rub some people the wrong way. And there's always been that part of it since day one that he's gotten here.
Right. One of the things that I don't think was emphasized as much previously that Jeff really hammered down on in the article was not that he's stubborn, not that he's not a coachable player. You're right. That had been reported a lot. But this year, he was probably more aggressive at checking off plays sent in from the sidelines, checking to his own choices and running the plays he wants than maybe he ever did before. And it certainly was intimated, if not straight out said in the article, he did it to spite Doug Peterson, that the division between he and the coach had gotten so great that he just stopped listening to him and said, well, I'm going to make this my offense. So if you think Peterson did a lousy job play calling this year, know full well you got to share that with Carson Wentz.
Yeah, and that part of it, I kind of, to be honest, I kind of blame Doug, and not as a defense of Carson from a standpoint of, well, guess what? If somebody's being that, what to your offense, and screwing things up on purpose, well, you don't have to call a play where you can kill it from say a pass to a run. So much of modern football, just call the play. Say run the play. So Doug could have nipped that in the bud. But, you've talked about the relationships. It's been described as fractured. There's no doubt that when he benched Carson Wentz that Carson was very upset and who knew if this relationship was going to be repairable, and certainly That's one of the reasons Doug is probably out of here, although Press Taylor's a much bigger one. And it's pretty evident that Jeffrey Lurie's going to move forward with Carson Wentz, and he wants a coach that's going to be able to repair him. So all of that enters into the equation. But, yeah, I mean, it's tremendously unprofessional if he's killing plays for spite. But, again, if you go back to his first year, and by the way, Jody, this is one of the reasons the Eagles claimed they like Carson Wentz better than Jared Goff back in the draft when he came here, is because he was more equipped to handle autonomy at the line of scrimmage. He's always wanted more autonomy to do different things. Again, quarterbacks that can handle that, like Brady, Peyton Manning, it's great. But if you can't handle it, it's not so great. And that's where we got to with Carson Wentz.
Understood. And it is now a major driving force in the Eagles' ongoing attempt to find their next head coach. They've already interviewed a couple of guys. A couple of guys have already said thank you, no, and signed on with other teams. They may or may not wait for Bieniemy. They didn't get a chance to interview him today. They did Bowles instead, who also is his team is still advancing with Tampa going to the NFC Championship game. Do you have to get off the plane, and does your first line have to be, I can fix Carson Wentz if you're applying for the job as Eagles head coach?
It's one of them. You got to agree to a lot of things. That's one of the problems. You got to agree to personnel, obviously issues as far as not having maybe as much say as you would like. You have to agree to certain coaching aspects of it as far as assistance. You have to agree with game day analytics and having Ryan Paganetti in your ear and telling you what to do in a certain situation. Go for 2, kick the extra point, go for 4th and 3. And then you got to agree that Carson Wentz is fixable. So that's a lot of agreeing you have to do to be the head coach of the Philadelphia Eagles. And that's one of the reasons Robert Saleh didn't really take this job seriously. Arthur Smith didn't take this job seriously. Brian Daboll said no thanks to an interview request. In the case of the first two, they had options. In the case of Daboll, I think he was disappointed he didn't get the Chargers job, and at that point said, you know what, I'll just stick in Buffalo with Josh Allen. And that's kind of where we are. And I got to be honest with you, Jody, I think the other J-Mac is going to be the head coach of this team this week.
We'll get to Josh McDaniels. I'm not a fan. I'm not a fan
You're not the only one.
Of him as a coach of the Philadelphia Eagles. I would not be a fan of him as the head coach of any professional football team. I don't quite see the allure because he sits at the right hand of Bill Belichick that somehow makes him eligible to be a good NFL head coach. It didn't last long. It didn't go real well in Denver. Someone else was foolish enough to offer him their head coaching position. He said yes. He got them to hire assistant coaches who they got on signed contracts, but then he decided, better yet, I don't think I want to come. I want to stay with my boy Bill. And he walked out on him, and the Eagles are going to be the team that says, it's okay, you can come coach our team, even though you're one of the most untrustable coaches in the National Football League. What is it about McDaniels? He seems to be the anti-Eagle head coach if we believe it's going to have to start with, Carson Wentz is the man, and I'll certainly accept any guidance you want to give me about how to handle Carson Wentz, and, I'll be able to fix him. Why would they want a guy who's proven before, when he has been the man, he doesn't necessarily listen to anybody?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I can't answer that question. That when we started this thing, this was the last name I would have brought up to be the head coach of the Philadelphia Eagles. Certainly amongst them. You bring up Denver. I always joke, other than Adam Gase, I think Josh McDaniels is the worst NFL head coach I've ever seen. I think he was the living and breathing embodiment of what Mike Lombardi once claimed Doug Peterson was. But I can overlook that because he was 32. I think he was 32 years old. He got that job way before he should have gotten it. He was very immature. I think even he would admit that. You had all the issues with Jay Cutler. Cutler said he didn't trust him. That's the head coach of your football team. And Bob, people forget, I think it was 5-0 his first season, and he just couldn't get along with the quarterback. Typically, and we see it in Philadelphia, we just talked about it with Carson and Doug Peterson, when things go bad, you have fractured relationships. This guy had a fractured relationship when things were going well. And ultimately that went off the rails. He also had a cheating scandal there. He also grossly misevaluated Tim Tebow. But again, he rehabilitated himself. I can overlook that. The Indianapolis stuff, I can't overlook. I mean, you just explained it, Jody. That is incredibly unprofessional to the point where Bob Lamont dropped him as a client. That's how unprofessional he was to the Indianapolis Colts. So I went back, and between, I think, 2015 and he took the Colts job, he had 11 interviews. He was the guy. He was the hot commodity. He had rebuilt himself. Since he did that 180, this is it. This is the only opportunity he's gotten. And I think he understands this is my only chance to do this again. And I got to take it or I'm not going to get another opportunity. From the Eagles' standpoint, it's a little bit tougher to explain. All I can lean on is Jeffrey's a Boston guy. He's always loved the Patriots. He tried to buy the Patriots before he bought the Eagles. He is enamored with the way they do business. He's in awe of the way they do business. I can't think of another reason. But he's going to hire this guy as his head coach.
Which is just stone cold sad. So let me just confirm, because I said this in the first segment of the night, and I'm trying to follow it as best I can, and you're better at it than I am. Correct me if I'm wrong. No other team even reached out for McDaniels to ask for permission or see if he would have any interest or put out feelers. I know he didn't get any other interviews, but there was no other team that even showed minimal interest in McDaniel with all the openings in the NFL this offseason?
No, certainly no interviews. I mean, that's confirmed, and no feelers, no even reports of somebody thinking about asking for a request to interview. And again, this all comes off the Indianapolis escapade, which hurt him in the NFL as a whole. Just devastated him because, as I said before that, pre-Indianapolis, he was getting interviews all over the place. He was the guy who could turn down jobs, understanding another one was around the corner, and he could pick his spots. And you can disagree with that as well. But again, he had rehabilitated himself as an offensive coach. I do think he deserves credit for, if you think about New England over the years, he built that offense that was sort of built around the inside slot receivers, the Welkers, the Edelmans, Gronkowski's at tight end, Aaron Hernandez before he went off the rails. Personally, he was a very innovative guy because you didn't see other offenses do that type of thing. So from an X's and O's standpoint, there's some really good things about him. But the other stuff, being a head coach, and for Jeffrey Lurie to have gone through it with Chip Kelly and the inability to communicate with people, that's Josh McDaniels, man. He might be a better scheme coach, but you're going to run into some of the same difficulties. And this strikes me as we got to find a guy to fix Carson Wentz, and we're not thinking about anything else.
Yeah, that's the number one requirement, unquestioned. And, oh, by the way, Carson Wentz isn't Tom Brady. Yes, Josh McDaniels has had some success as an offense coordinator in this league, when Tom Brady was running his offense. This year, no Tom Brady. The Cam Newton-led Patriot offense didn't wow anybody, so I don't know if he is. Some offensive genius or guru, or he's just a guy who was able to ride the coattails of Tom Brady for a decade plus.
Yeah, and I joked. I don't think this is a chicken and the egg causality question. I think we know the answer to that, and it is Tom Brady because, Tom's going to his 14th championship game, twice as many as any other quarterback in history, on a new team in a new conference with a new coach and a new offensive coordinator and new players. So Tom Brady is, if he's not the greatest quarterback of all time, he's certainly in the conversation in a very, very short list. And I bring back the comparison with Adam Gase. Adam Gase was once the number one candidate in this league. Why? Because Peyton Manning threw for 50 touchdowns. And Peyton Manning and the Denver offense scored 600 points. How did he do without Peyton Manning at playing at an MVP level? I mean, this league's about personnel. And you're right, Carson Wentz ain't Tom Brady.
No, not even close. John McMullen, Philly Voice SI, extending the play pod, our guest here on 94 WIP. Let's say that Jeffrey has a come-to-Jesus moment, and he realizes there's a whole lot of negatives about Josh McDaniels, and I'm going to get roasted if that's the case. If McDaniels comes in and does demand that he put Howie in a broom closet somewhere and make him the general manager, however he gets off the rails, it goes off the rails. Where do they go next?
I think it would be Todd Bowles because people in the organization like him, and it would be sort of a safety net and and it would be ironic because they're so different. I mean, Todd Bowles is such a quiet guy, gets along with everybody, very understated. And it would be almost, I hate to use that term safety net because it sort of degrades him as a football coach a little bit. But it is, one guy is sort of like rolling the dice and you're going 100 miles an hour and you're crossing your fingers, and the other guy is like the comfortable pair of shoes. That's the comparison. And I think that's where the Eagles are. But the second part is they don't have a lot of options. I was told, and by the way, Jody, this is very weird to me. I was told the Eagles have an issue with the optics of another Andy Reid coach, and that's why Mike Kapp is not in the equation. Eric Bieniemy is probably not going to be in the equation. And I'm thinking they have a problem with the optics of an Andy Reid coach when Andy's going back to a third consecutive AFC championship game. First guy to do it in both conferences. They're on the cusp of another Super Bowl berth, and you have a problem with an Andy Reid student, and you don't have the problem of the optics of Josh McDaniels? What is going on here? I was concerned they were going to hire Josh McDaniels today on Martin Luther King Day. And Eric Bieniemy's agent, I don't know if you saw the tweet, he put out that the Eagles were going to hire Josh McDaniels and how disgusted that they were, not just at the Eagles, but the entire league when it comes to minority candidates and another hiring cycle. And I'm thinking, how tone deaf is this organization? They're concerned about the optics of an Andy Reid coach. It's bizarre to me.
Right. And if they really were concerned about optics, and this is probably a little bit of an overstatement, but it's how I feel, the feel-good coach for the Eagles to hire is Deuce Staley. Now, I'm not sure that Deuce Staley is the most legitimate choice or that he's the guy who makes the most sense, but he is the guy who I think would, if Jeffrey cares at all, and if you're making statements like we worry about the optics of something, well, then, yeah, it would just look good for the players in the locker room, the fans of the Philadelphia Eagles in this town. across the board in the NFL, promoting from within, giving a loyal guy a shot, a guy who wasn't a quarterback, he's a former running back. There are a whole bunch of optics that play well for Deuce Staley. Now, I don't know that equates that Deuce Staley gets him back to the Super Bowl, and that should be the number one thing that the Eagles are attempting to do. Hire the best coach that gets him a chance to get back to the ultimate. But do they or don't they care about optics? If they do, put it this way, if they hire somebody else, how bad is it going to look that they are just using Deuce as a guy to, A, make it seem like they care about their coaches and the people who work under them in the organization, and B, even the Rooney Rule?
Yeah, I mean, early in the process, I thought, Deuce Staley made a lot of sense for the reason that, Jeffrey mentioned the word, I think, transition. Didn't want to say rebuild, but mentioned transition, I think, 7 times in his press conference. So it's pretty clear this team thinks they got to rip it down and build back up. So, A, you need a coach for a rebuild. And from that standpoint, I don't think it's necessarily fair to Deuce to put him in that type of position. But secondly, you have all the people in the locker room, current players, Rodney McLeod, Brandon Graham, even former players like Malcolm Jenkins, Chris Long, all endorsing Deuce Staley. What a great leader. He should be the head coach of this team. It would have been a home run from that standpoint. The realization that, and I made this comparison before, it certainly wouldn't be as bad, but a Brett Brown type situation with Sixers, you're in a rebuild anyway. And maybe, 3-4 years down the road, you're going to need a different coach to take you to that next level. And maybe that's how you should have went about it. But it's been a strange search as a whole. It's been all over the place. There's no theme. You got young guys. You got veteran guys. You got out-of-the-box guys like Josh McDaniels who came out of nowhere. There has been no rhyme nor reason to it, and I think that tells you a lot about this organization right now. It's a little schizophrenic, and I think they're just throwing darts. And, I think ultimately it's going to come down, sadly, to Jeffrey Lurie's respect for the New England Patriots. I think that's what it's going to come down to.
But somehow he's lost his respect for Andy Reid, who just continues to go to championship game after championship game after championship game, but he's still got the longing to steal one from New England. That's just flat out wrong. All right, one more question on the coaching search. If McDaniels or Bowles, or we find out that they do decide to wait for one of Andy's old guys, or they go a little surprising and turn it over to Joe Brady, because there's an argument to be made for him. If you're going to a transitional period, you might as well go with a guy who at least has the chance of becoming an offensive genius and guru, which Josh McDaniels won't be growing into, but that's just my opinion. If that's the case, if they go to someone else, but they say, listen, we'd really like you to keep Deuce around. If you're Deuce Staley, they've elevated you to assistant coach. They haven't given you the offensive coordinatorship. Do you try and talk him into the offensive coordinatorship, your new coach? What happens to Deuce Staley if he's not the next head coach of the Eagles?
Yeah, I mean, if I were Deuce, I would want to move on, but I hesitate to say, look, I mean, I don't advocate that anybody be unemployed either. Right. I mean, he hasn't gotten other head coaching interviews. He hasn't gotten bites for coordinator positions. So, I mean, from that standpoint, he might have to swallow and come back, because I do think this organization would keep him around and make sure he's on the new coaching staff. But I do think they've made it very clear. Look, he got interviewed in 2016 for the head coaching job. He got passed over. He got passed over twice for the coordinator position, offensive coordinator. Now he gets passed over in theory again for the head coaching position. I think that tells you all you need to know, that this organization, he's reached the glass ceiling. And if he has other options, and a couple of years ago, I think it was 2 years ago, he was thinking about going back to South Carolina and his alma mater and coaching at the college level. And if he wants to take that step forward, it might be a situation where he has to take a step back to take those two forward. And I would advocate he did it because he'd do it because this organization is clearly not going to allow him to go any higher.
All right, Johnny Mac, last thing, and I just said this shortly before you were on, and I punched you up, and either agree or disagree with me. Was 3 consecutive passes by Andy Reid with just over 2 minutes to go, and then the last play being under 2 minutes to go. Was that not the most Andy Reid thing you'd ever seen? You know he can run it 3 straight times and take it down to 1:20. Oh, no, we'll throw on second down, get sacked. We'll throw on third down, and a 30-plus-year-old veteran has to take off and almost runs for 14 yards, which he needs for a first down, comes a half a yard short. And then on fourth down, yeah, we'll sprint him out and throw it again. If that isn't Andy Reid, I don't know what is.
I got to tell you, Jody, anybody who's listened to me for years, I have tremendous respect for Andy Reid. I think he's one of the greatest coaches of all time, number one. But he has evolved over the years. He does that all the time with Patrick Mahomes. What impressed me, now Patrick Mahomes is great. He goes for the kill shot. He has evolved as a coach. He's it's ironic because you talk about the Joe Brady's of the world. Josh McDaniels we talked about as a 32-year-old head coach. All these young guns, Sean McVay, on and on and on. Brandon Staley now on the defensive side of the football. Andy's the most innovative coach in the game. What impressed me, he goes for the win. Patrick Mahomes is out in concussion protocol. He goes for the win with Chad Henne.
Chad Henne.
The aggression and the ability to understand his personnel. Nobody can cover Tyreek Hill on that speed out. They do it all the time. There's a reason he's in 3 straight championship games. There's a reason he was in 3 straight championship games here. He's a great coach.
You got that right. J-Mac, always a pleasure, my friend. We'll probably have a new head coach by the time next week rolls around. I will probably call on you again. Always great to get you on. Thanks for hopping on and giving us your insight.
All right. Thanks, Jody. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. That is John McMullen. Do check out his podcast, the Extending the Play podcast, and read them all the time in Philly Voice and SI. Jody Mack hanging with you here on 94 WIP. We'll continue the Eagle conversation. Oh, by the way, Fly Guys got crushed tonight, got beat up by the Sabres at home. Oh, by the way, goal in the third period to make it not look